We're back with another episode of Things You Can't Live Without, the science podcast where I, material scientist Dr. Anna Pajajski, ask my guests to reveal the single item that they can't live without. We're interested in how this stuff came into existence, from mining to processing to making it. And we'll be accompanied on this journey by a host of experts who are going to be helping us with all the behind-the-scenes science that goes into creating the everyday. They'll also help us to gaze into the future to answer the question, if we can't live without this stuff, then what are we prepared to change in order to live with it sustainably? Today, I'm honoured to have with me Buddha Low. For the cooking enthusiasts amongst us, Buddha needs no introduction. Born in Australia, he began working in the kitchen of his dad's restaurant when he was just 12 years old. He's worked in Michelin-star restaurants across the globe and founded some of his own. In 2022, he became a contestant in the American TV series Top Chef, which he went on to win not once but twice, the first person ever to do so. Buddha, welcome to Things You Can't Live Without.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. And I imagine you're somebody who knows their way around a kitchen. You've got a kitchen gadget or two, I'm certain. But tell us, of all of those, what's the one item you can't live without?
Anna, the one item I can't live without is salt. You'll find that in every single kitchen all around the world. And just like my kitchen, I cannot live without it.
Such a basic ingredient, everyone has it in their kitchen. Why is it so ubiquitous around the world?
Salt is the flavor enhancer. It's so important that it just brings out natural flavors and just makes things just taste so much better. But not only that, it's also something that we need to survive on. So we literally cannot live without salt.
Yes, you can't, we all need it in our lives. It's an interesting material, this one, because all of the materials we've featured on this podcast so far have been finite resources in some way, but salt is a bit different because thanks to our oceans, we can be fairly safe in the knowledge, at least in the short to medium term, that we're never going to run out of salt. But having said that, the practice of extracting and processing salt, of course, takes some form of energy, so it doesn't get to escape our scrutiny when it comes to sustainability and pushing for net zero. And as we're going to find out, salt is integral not just to the kitchen, but also is a fundamental ingredient in many industrial processes behind the scenes that are making materials, making stuff for our world as well. To tell us more about all of that and more is Rio Tinto's Chief Advisor of Process Development, Amy Lamb. Hi, Amy. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Amy. I'm so excited to talk to you about how we get from sea to salt. But first, Buddha, I'd love to hear, I guess, a bit of your personal journey with this special ingredient.
Well, like you said, it's something that people need in their diets, but it's so important. I mean, I literally have my career hanging on this one particular item. If I under-season it, I'm going to be told that that's not correct. If I over-season it, it's not going to be correct. So salt is so important. I cannot create food without it.
So what are all the ways that you use salt in the kitchen?
We use it literally for every single thing that we cook. The golden rule for us in the kitchen is actually, I learned that when I was an apprentice in a hotel. I under-seasoned something, or I didn't put salt in particular stocks or broths or water. So yeah, he would say salt everything, including your water. That is something that has been ingrained in me into making sure that everything is seasoned. So you're going to find salt in every part of the kitchen.
I love that. I'm going to start doing this as well, just putting little pots of salt all over. Although my kitchen's much smaller than yours, I'm sure.
Yeah, I live in New York City, so it's pretty small.
Fair enough. I meant your work kitchen, but yeah.
Work kitchen, even work kitchens in New York City is pretty small, so yeah.
I was given a gift recently, which was a friend of mine had come back from holiday and she gave me a gift of salt, funnily enough. And it was 4 little pots of it. One of them was black with activated carbon in it. One of them was pink with something else in it, and all these different types. Is that a real thing? You know, how different are different types of salt?
As a chef and cooking every single day, I don't actually use other different types of salts. I don't find that the impact of it is going to change it to a different level. I guess what would probably change things is actually more salts from different natural ingredients, maybe something that has been salted, soy sauce, maybe anchovies or cheese. I find like the salinity that you get from, these sort of processes is actually far greater than the different types of salts that are out there. But yeah, that's in kitchens, we'd never go, hey, pass us the volcanic salt. It's not going to change your life.
You mentioned sweet dishes earlier. I've got an incredibly sweet tooth, and I love salty and sweet together.
Yeah.
And my sort of main, I guess, encounter with salt is actually as a sea swimmer. I spent a lot of time doing long distance open water swimming in the sea, which is a very salty environment. And so I went down this sort of research rabbit hole a little while ago about have you heard of Battenberg cake?
It's the cake with the squares.
Yeah,
inside
that's
of
right.
it.
Pink and yellow squares with marzipan around the outside. But I found this research that showed that there's a receptor. It regulates how it communicates with the outside world. And what it does is it transports sugars into cells, but only when sodium is present. And this was found on the sweet taste buds on mice. So basically what this finding was saying was that these sweet taste buds would only kind of trigger a feeling or a flavor of sweetness to the mouse in the presence of sodium, which is salt.
Yeah, I believe that. I think I was learning that it opens the taste buds. As soon as the salt touches your tongue, it opens your taste buds and it allows more flavor to come in. And I don't think life is worth living unless you're tasting the maximum flavor. So
I want that on a t-shirt. I love that.
Yeah.
Amy, I'd love to turn to you and ask you, do you have any either kind of salty mishaps, or do you feel particularly strongly about any unconventional uses of salt, like in tea or coffee or even unsalted butter? Where do you stand on this?
I actually will admit I've never tried salt in my coffee, so I'll have to give that a go sometime. See how that changes the flavor of my my cappuccino in the morning. But I did have a salty mishap once. I brined a turkey for Thanksgiving one year. So after brining the turkey, we had the juices, and of course you make gravy with the juices from the turkey. Not realizing the salt content, I didn't taste it beforehand, and I ended up with very salty gravy. So I ended up using instant gravy for my Thanksgiving feast, which I was not happy about. But lesson is very much learned. When brining meat, the juices are very salty, so be careful how you use them.
That's a very good lesson to learn. I'm sure you won't make that mistake again. And I'm glad you were able to salvage it with, some instant in the cupboard. So, Buddha, you've beautifully explained, the significance of salt to the art and the craft of cooking. And I looked up, where the word salt comes from. It's actually from the Latin word sal. And funnily enough, the word salary, like paycheck, comes from the same word for salt. It relates to the fact that the Roman soldiers were given monetary wages in order that they could go and buy salt. So it was seen as like such an important and integral ingredient for them that they had, their wage packet to cover it. It's amazing when you start looking into it that salt is not only important for our health and for, the enjoyment of food, but it's also a surprisingly integral part to making loads of industrial processes happen and loads of materials that we use. Things like glass, like most glass that we have, the sorts of glass that you would have in a restaurant to drink from, for example, that's a type of glass called soda lime glass. And the soda part of that is sodium from sodium chloride. Similarly with like plastics like PVC, polyvinyl chloride, the chloride part of that comes from sodium chloride. And the biggest use, probably the one that people will think of the most, is in de-icing and making sure that roads are safe in the wintertime. So we have a huge amount to be grateful for with salt, not just for deliciousness, but also for loads of the materials in our material world. Going back to the de-icing usage, salt changes the freezing temperature of water, but it also changes the boiling temperature, right? And that's a common use in the kitchen, isn't it? How do you use it to kind of modify boiling temperature?
Yeah, so that's very interesting as you're saying it. As you were saying, I was like, the heating and the cooling of adding salt to water, it's really weird because it does I'm hoping that you could probably explain it a little bit more. But yeah, the temperature of water is 100 degrees boiling, but when it has salt in it, it does increase to about, I believe, about 107, maybe 110. You want to keep that process. If you're cooking a vegetable, the salt is also going into the vegetable and it will season the inside of it. And that's the best way to do it, because you do want salt to penetrate vegetables and make sure that it's seasoned all the way through. Once you then put it into ice water, it doesn't make sense to just put it in bland water.
So what are you using that ice water for cooling things down quickly, did you say?
Yes, so mainly vegetables, but we would, whatever that we're cooking, yeah, we would use that salted water for it.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to start doing that. So you asked about the chemistry of it. Now, as you and listeners will know, as we've already said, salt dissolves in water. To understand why salt alters the boiling point of water, we first need to understand what water is. So water is H2O, right? Hydrogen and oxygen. The shape of the water molecule is a V shape. And really importantly, this shape means that one side of a water molecule is slightly positively charged, where the hydrogens are, and the other side is more negatively charged, where the oxygen is. When water is just water with nothing else added to it, there are attractive forces between the positive sides and the negative sides of water molecules. You can maybe imagine them a little bit like tiny magnets swimming around. What's happening chemically when you add salt to the party is that salt's chemical name is sodium chloride, sodium and chlorine. When salt dissolves in water, it becomes charged sodium and chlorine ions, which are floating around between the water molecules, which, as I've said themselves, have slightly positive and negative sides to them. So what ends up happening is that the charged sodium and chlorine ions are attracted to the charged sides of the water molecules. These attractions are much stronger than the forces between the water molecules themselves. Boiling water happens when water molecules are given enough heat energy to break the attractive forces between them, and they can go flying off to make a gas. But when there's salt in the water molecules are effectively held back by the charges between them and the salt ions in the liquid. This means that the water molecules need more heat energy in order to break away, which is why the boiling point of water rises when salt is added. So salt is integral to making loads of our everyday materials. I mentioned rubber and glass, textiles, paper, and it's also really important to food and to our bodies. It's now time to bring in Amy Lamb to tell us more about where it comes from. This is such a precious material. Where does salt come from, Amy?
Basically, salt comes from two different sources, either from rocks, as in the form of rock salt, or from the sea, as from sea salt. Sea salt is basically the evaporation of water from seawater to crystallize the salt, and then pretty much it's dug up and washed and then sold on as product from our salt operations. Rock salt, on the other hand, comes from underground. So these have been formed over millions and millions of years. It's basically it's the same evaporation process of seawater, but it's done over a long period of time, and you get large deposits of salt underground. And so you end up mining the salt from underground. Mm-hmm. They generally do need a purification step at some stage.
And what sort of scale are we talking here? How big are these processes?
Depends on the operation. If you look at Rio Tinto's Dampier salt operation, we use that sea salt. So we pump seawater into evaporation ponds, and we have the capacity to produce about 10 million tons of salt a year.
That sounds like quite a lot.
It is quite a lot. And to put it in perspective, that is equivalent to evaporating 19,500 hectares of water each year.
Amy, when you say evaporation pond, how's it getting evaporated? What sort of process do you use for that?
That's another one. It's probably one of the first renewable processes used because it uses the sun's heat and wind to evaporate the water. Now, as you can imagine, it takes a long time for that. And the reason you need so much space is because you don't want to have very deep ponds. So you want to have, they're actually quite shallow.
Okay, so you need a lot of space and you need a lot of sun and warmth. I imagine you don't do this where I live in London. Where is it done?
No, you do need a little bit of space, and Australia has plenty. So our Dampier salt operation is along the coast of Western Australia, Another interesting thing about the Dampier Salts operation is that it's actually been identified as a key biodiversity area for by BirdLife Australia, because we have migratory birds that come and feast on the invertebrates that are in these ponds. It's actually quite a ecological phenomenon for these sites. So even though we have 27,000 football fields worth of salt ponds, they are part of the ecosystem.
So once you've scraped it off the bottom of your evaporation pools, what happens next? How does it then get processed?
So we basically assess the quality of the salt, and depending on the quality, we'll determine which customer it's best suited for.
I always think of salt when we're talking about kind of industrial usage. Salt is very pesky when it comes to interacting with other materials, especially steel and iron. You know, salt it's a real accelerant to the rusting process, to corrosion. So is that something that when you're using salt on industrial scales with industrial equipment that you have to take into account?
Absolutely. As anyone who's had to drive over iced roads, you do actually witness that corrosiveness as well on your cars. So yes, in processing with salt, you do need to adjust the processing methodologies for that corrosive behavior. So corrosive resistant materials such as stainless steel, obviously regular maintenance and the coating of equipment parts is key to that. Also, corrosiveness also increases the energy consumption in a plant. So you end up using more energy in your heat exchangers and evaporators if you do have corrosion going on.
Oh, okay.
So absolutely, it's preventing corrosion in the first instance is quite key to the efficiency of processing salts.
Buddha, did you have any questions about the kind of industrial processing of salt? Did you have any idea that your salt was coming from these sorts of places?
Well, I think that salt, especially with, we're talking about sea salt and rock salt, and just how the sea actually really flavor enhances the world, really. I mean, I'm thinking about seaweeds and kombus and stuff like that. That's I'm not sure if it would be in the same sort of topic, but MSG, it is a sodium, but it is a complete different sort of flavor enhancer out there.
Yeah. And
that typically that would come from seaweed, kombu. So we're looking at two of our biggest flavor enhancers coming from the sea. So it's very interesting just listening to the process of how things were done, how salt's collected. I'm from Australia, so it's a massive island, surrounded by the sea, and it's a lot of land. So it makes a lot of sense. And it just makes me think about, how at one stage, with 10 million tons of salt, I mean, you could possibly be one of the most richest people on the earth at one stage, right?
Absolutely. I think to put it into perspective, the salt production in 2022 was 290 million tons. And so the 10 million tons that Rio Tinto produced is only a drop in the bucket, really.
Would those salts that do they use for the roads still be able to be consumed, or would you say that's not edible?
No, that's a lower quality. Yeah, that's a lower quality salt and hasn't gone through the same purification processes that the salt, the table salt has gone through.
Yeah, super interesting. But I'm going to now transport you into a terrible world, I'm afraid. It's a theoretical world. You're not going anywhere. But I would like for you to imagine that industrial scale salt processing is no longer viable. You still live in your apartment in New York City. What lengths are you going to go to source your own?
We're going to have to be able to not just be able to just use it for salting water and anymore. You would have to use that it'll be just like using truffle or caviar. It's something that's very, there's not a great amount of it. So, but you're going to have to pay a lot more for it. So using that salt is going to taste, I wouldn't say better, but when you do get that bit of salt, you're going to be like, wow, this changed my life. So I'm glad I don't live in a world where salt is that scarce.
Amy, when we think about costs, salt is not an especially expensive ingredient to me. I imagine it's relatively plentiful. Are there any other unseen costs to the people or the places where it's made that do impact, on its kind of sustainability?
I guess it's pretty similar to other industrial processes as far as the impacts to people and the environment. So whether it's your carbon footprint or how much land you need or how much water you use, those are really impacts to the people and the cost to society as a whole. We really need to stay mindful of the impact that we do have when we're developing these projects.
And when it comes to the energy usage, is it possible to make salt 100% carbon neutral or 100% sustainable?
Well, if you're using renewable energy, I would say yes. So using the wind or solar or hydropower is a great way to get towards that net zero goal.
It's so interesting because as soon as we start looking at these everyday objects, you suddenly see, I guess you might call it a carbon footprint, or, you kind of suddenly see the impact that you wouldn't have thought of before. But have you ever looked at a grain of salt and thought, what's been the impact of this existing?
That's a really big question because it just blows my mind to think how old salt is and how we've used it and how it's just absolutely changed the world. Before fridges, preserving food, that was the main resource to preserve food. And I believe there's been wars over salt, but there's also been wars that have been lost because of salt, because if you don't have salt provisions onto your boat, if you're traveling and whatnot, if you're doing long distance traveling, that was the way that you lived. You would have to salt the stuff that you take on board so it has longer shelf life.
One thing I find fascinating is how long salt has been around. 6,000 years ago there's archaeologists have found evidence that salt manufacturing happened that far back. And just one interesting fact is that sea salt, that is a renewable resource, because as long as we have oceans, we will have salt. And the other interesting thing, what I heard, the forecast for salt demand is going to go up to about 500 million tons of salt by 2050.
So to wrap up, looking to the future, I guess, we've talked about potentially new sustainable processes, new places to find salt, new ways of making sure that it's sustainable and ecological. Amy, are there any particular advancements that you are excited for, that you're looking forward to? I'm thinking of, for example, of sodium-ion batteries compared to lithium-ion batteries, which we also covered on this podcast. The argument being, you can have a battery system that operates on sodium that is, as you say, essentially an infinite resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of advantages to those batteries as well. One is safety. They're not going to start. There's no fire risk and there's no toxic chemicals involved in those batteries. They're also easily recyclable and they have a long life cycle. Unfortunately, the disadvantages are the costs for those, and also they have a lower energy density. So the batteries need to be larger, as it were, and there is some difficulty to building it at scale at the moment. So there's still a lot of work happening, and I think it's going to improve.
Yeah. Okay. So we won't have to either have salty dinner or a new battery for our laptop. We might still be able to have both for now.
Yes.
Wow. And Buddha, how about for you? What cooking adventures await you next?
So many. I mean, I just completed Top Chef World All Stars, and so winning that has opened up a lot of doors for me. But I think that also spreading the word and making sure that everyone knows about what they eat, what they put into their body, and making sure that that knowledge, that history, all those sort of things tie into people's backgrounds, where, just being able to salt something and really understand why we do it, like the Koreans do with kimchi. They salt preserve their cabbages, and they use that and they have it in their fridges for forever. It's something that everyone could learn how to do and realize how easy it is. And I think people will be learning that sort of thing. People will be a lot more aware of where their food comes from, be a lot more thoughtful on how they consume and what they do with it, and look for a better future with food. So I'm hoping to not only just cook, but also spread the word about the knowledge that I've learned throughout my time.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and passion, Buddha Lo and Amy Lam.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm off to relive my sea swimming days by eating a kilo of seaweed and an entire Battenberg cake by myself. You've been listening to Things You Can't Live Without, a podcast brought to you by Rio Tinto. You can listen to more episodes of Things You Can't Live Without wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to follow, rate and review us to make sure that you don't miss an episode.